The purpose of this live stream is to clarify a conversation that was had earlier today between me and one of the viewers of one of my prior publications here on YouTube. The guy goes by the name of Bobby Snell 98. That's his YouTube identification name. And he had responded to one of my prior posts where I spoke about how having a replica of an antique firearm, specifically the Remington 1858 single action revolver, can be uh, owned by those who have obtained prior felony convictions under federal law and various state laws. This guy, like so many other individuals who have come across in the past, made an effort to challenge me on the issue in which I had addressed. Now, I responded back to this individual, and the last response that I gave was basically telling this particular individual that he, like many others, are incompetent when it comes to knowing about matters related to law, specifically statutory provisions governing firearms ownership and possession. And I know this to be true because even though it may not look like it, I have studied law for over 20 years. And during the course of my legal studies, I have come across various judicial precedents, statutory provisions, rules and regulations that those in civil service have not made available to the public. And what I mean by making it available to the public, they don't speak about it openly to members of the general population here in America, which is why so many of us are incompetent when it comes to our civil liberty to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights. And that is a freaking problem. That is why when I address, what was his name again? Bobby Snell, in the latest reply that I gave to his comment to my previous post, he claimed that I was being hostile. Okay? Hostile because of what I said. But the fact of the matter is, I was not hostile towards this individual who responded to my prior YouTube posts. I was basically stating the obvious fact. Now, many people tend to believe that when you get an antique firearm, specifically, like I said earlier, the Remington 1858 single action revolver, in which I published in my video. For those of you who are wondering, it was published July 23rd of 2024 last year. But here's the thing. When it comes to conversion cylinders, many people, like Bobby that I speak of, are under the erroneous presumption that if an individual has obtained an antique firearm that is a replica of the original antique, that to swap out the black powder cylinder with a conversion cylinder, which would allow an individual to fire fixed ammunition, is illegal. But here's the thing. It cannot be illegal to have a conversion cylinder that was manufactured at the time that the original firearm or antique firearm was produced or in production. And that cutoff a year is 1898. Anything or any firearm that was manufactured prior to the year of 1899 is considered an antique firearm. And any replica thereof is also considered an antique firearm if, according to the statutory provisions governing federal law and here in the state of North Carolina where I reside, if that replica isn't designed to fire rimfire or conventional centerfire fixed ammunition. Here's the thing about that statement that I just made. Many people tend to overlook the a word conventional. Now, conventional in the Black's Law Dictionary, to include the Webster's Dictionary, Mr. Snell, means the same thing. Conventional is just another term for saying that it cannot be obtained through the ordinary channels of commerce. Now, when you look at 45 code ammunition, specifically the cowboy action load, in which those particular antique firearms are specifically designed to be chambered in, you cannot find cowboy action loads at any freaking store. Many gun stores here in the state of North Carolina does not have them. Heck, you can go to a gun show and many dealers do not have that specific ammunition because it is not considered conventional. It is not easily obtained. It is not readily available. That is what that term means from a legal standpoint. And if you, Mr. Bobby, had looked at my prior videos, listened to them, you would have known that. But it seems like every time I speak about law, many people tend to have been conditioned through tradition to the extent that even if the law is put right before their very eyes, they still choose to dwell in ignorance. I know this. Now, there's a lot of things that I haven't told many of you about my personal situation, but I'm going to save that for another day, and I have my reasons. Because the reason is I don't want to discourage any of you from doing what it is that I have done because of what people believe, as I said earlier, being conditioned through tradition. But here's the thing. When you look at conversion cylinders, if you ever purchase a conversion cylinder from Taylor's and Company, which is what I did, on the actual document, it specifically says this, coming straight from members of the ATF. For those of you who put so much emphasis on what they say when it comes to their take on what gun laws really mean. And I quote, "This conversion cylinder is classified as a part by the ATF. No FFL is required to purchase this product," end quote. So if a conversion cylinder is not required to, for a person to undergo a criminal background check, for instance, to actually purchase it, then obviously it is not illegal per ATF rules and regulations based upon this a statement that was made by members of the ATF for an individual to legally own and actually drop in this particular conversion cylinder into a replica of an antique firearm. Okay? Now, this particular quote with relation to when conversion cylinders were actually manufactured here in the United States of America comes from gunmagazine.com. And I quote, "In 1868, Smith & Wesson entered an agreement with Remington, allowing them, Remington, to convert their percussion pistols to cartridge-firing revolvers using a bored-through cylinder," end quote. A bored-through cylinder is what conversion cylinders are essentially made of. That's what they are comprised of. And they all have, the ones that I'm speaking about specifically, 6 individual firing pins. Okay? 6 individual firing pins. So it's not a single firing pin like you see other revolvers have that are more modern. Even though you do have antique firearms that do have a single firing pin. But I'm not speaking about the original antiques at the moment. I'm speaking about the replicas of the original antiques. So they do fall up under two different sections to the federal statutory code. Okay, but when I was telling Mr. Bobby about this in the text that I sent him here on YouTube in response to his comments to my post, he still had something to say, y'all, that was negative towards what I said. And I'm going to tell you all something. When I tend to tell the truth about matters that I am absolutely familiar with, specifically matters related to law, as that pertains to our civil liberty to keep and bear arms, it offends me when people get on social media and they tend to speak about matters that they know nothing about and attack my character and reputation in the process. So yes, Mr. Bobby, I did lash out, and rightfully so. The point of me lashing out was not to specifically attack you, but it was to emphasize just how incompetent you were when you responded to me to the extent that you did with the knowledge that I have conveyed to you. And every other person who actually would look at my videos here on YouTube and find that specific information to be interesting. Now, when we look at judicial precedent, and we all know that judges, according to them, have the authority to declare laws unconstitutional through what they call judicial review, right? That's what they say. So with that being said, there's a case out of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit known as United States versus Royal. Citation number 731 F.3D 333, Fourth Circuit, 2013. On page 338 to that specific judicial precedent, Judge Diaz, in right for the majority, stated, and I quote, "We accept Royal's literal reading of the statute and agree that rounds designed for use exclusively in antique firearms do not meet the GCA's definition of ammunition," end quote. And they went on to further say why they made that particular statement. And Judge Diaz, again in writing for the majority, stated, "If these bullets had been designed exclusively for use in defendant's antique revolver, they would not be ammunition because by definition, this antique revolver is not a firearm." You understand that? This is coming from federal court judges, Mr. Bobby. And what judges have said, according to the Black's Law Dictionary, your legal opinion means nothing when it comes to your take on what the law is. You see, when I speak about law, I've already come across what it is that I'm speaking about. Therefore, I'm only conveying to you what it is that I have read and studied and have come to realize to be the actual truth through practicing what I preach, so to say. So I know about what it is that I'm talking about. It's just that people like you do not. And the more ignorant people are when it comes to the invocation of our Second Amendment liberty to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights, which is considered the supreme law of the land, those in civil service, as we have seen in recent times, will continue to create statutory provisions, to hand down judicial decisions, to sign off on executive orders that restricts our access to arms, which is what we need as individuals or collectively to protect every other freedom that we have under not only the Declaration of Independence, but also the Bill of Rights, the Constitution for the United States of America, to include the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Now, without firearms or ammunition, how the heck are we civilians going to stand up against lawless individuals or tyrants in public office when they step out of line and choose to oppress us through impeding upon our civil, constitutional, and human rights? We have to get real, people. They have made it to where we have shown so much discontent with one another in societies between us civilians. They have us believing that, oh, if you never had a official criminal record, that you are an upstanding, law-abiding citizen. Whereas if those who have been previously convicted of a felony or misdemeanor conviction, whether those offenses were for violent or non-violent crimes, oh, you are a criminal, you are a felon. But look at what has happened as a result of what many of these so-called law-abiding citizens in America have done when they have indicted individuals for simply exercising their Second Amendment liberty to keep and bear arms through relying upon some bogus statutory provision, as we know, to be called possession of a firearm by a felon in a state court proceeding, or possession of a firearm in commerce after felony conviction in a federal court proceeding. When many of you have ignored the Second Amendment as it pertains to certain individuals in our society, you in turn open up that very door for the very people who you have supported in civil service to violate your freedoms, as you so-called law-abiding citizens claim you are also. And I say that none of us are really law-abiding citizens, because if we look at the Holy Bible, the Bible depicts to me and everyone who has read that book that every one of us has come short of the glory of God through sin. And we all know sin is a form of violating the law, whether that be man law or God's law, right? That is what I mean when I say that. So, to wrap this up and put everything into specific perspective, a conversion cylinder does not alter the firearm from its original state that it was in prior to the year of 1899, which makes a conversion cylinder chambered in an antique round lawful for anyone with a prior felony or misdemeanor conviction to own under federal law and most state laws, as I indicated earlier. You're not changing the breech block. You're not doing any of those things to modify the gun. You're not modifying the gun. That is why they call them drop-in conversion cylinders. You drop them in, you take them out. You're not modifying anything as that modification pertains to federal law and other state laws that mirrors that federal statutory provision. I know, I've been there, y'all. And here's what the statute actually says for those of you who are wondering. This is North Carolina statute, but it's also the same under federal statutory provisions. When you look at North Carolina General Statute section 14-409.11, titled Antique Firearms Defined. When you look at, let's go to paragraph A. No, let me go back. Let's go to paragraph B, subsection 3. And it says, and I quote, "For the purposes of this section, the term antique firearm shall not include any weapon which is a muzzle-loading weapon that can be readily converted to fire fixed ammunition by replacing the barrel, bolt, breech block, or any combination thereof," end quote. When you drop in, or when you put a drop-in conversion cylinder into a replica of an antique firearm or an original antique firearm, you are not converting that weapon to fire a fixed ammunition by replacing the barrel. You're not replacing the barrel. It's a drop-in cylinder. You're not replacing the bolt. It's a drop-in cylinder. You're not replacing the breech block. It's a drop-in cylinder. or any combination thereof of any of those three things that I made reference to in this particular statutory provision, you're not changing any of that. That is why the ATF said that conversion cylinders are only a part of the gun. They are a part. You're not replacing anything through conversion. The conversion cylinder is basically termed that to show or signify that you are allowing that specific firearm to fire rimfire or conventional center-fired fixed ammunition, specifically in the cowboy action load. And as the judges in the royal decision stated, any ammunition that's specifically designed for a specific replica of an antique firearm, or antique firearm for that matter, is not considered ammunition under the Gun Control Act. Therefore, it is not illegal. Therefore, no law enforcement officer, whether federal or state, can essentially arrest the individual for having a replica of an antique firearm outfitted. Note that I said outfitted and not converted, outfitted with a conversion cylinder. And to be quite frank, y'all, for those of you who are unable to go out here to a federal firearms license dealer to purchase a firearm for your own personal protection and the protection of your family and friends, to include strangers, for those of us good people here in the country who would actually put ourselves on the line for someone we do not know, do you all not think it'd be better to have a conversion cylinder in one of those firearms, right? For the purpose of self-defense. I mean, can you imagine? In this current day and age, where people have Glock 17s outfitted with Sears, a.k.a. switches, when people have AR pistols outfitted with 100-round drums full of high-velocity ammunition, 1911s, semi-automatic weapons against a single-action revolver, would it not be best for people who are, according to what those in civil service, to include many civilians, say, have an antique firearm outfitted with a conversion cylinder, put you all in a greater position to defend yourselves against threats that people pose towards your person or your property or family and friends, as I indicated earlier? It'd be better that way, right? But can you imagine being in a physical altercation with a individual or a group of individuals who have semi-automatic weapons, and you have the original black powder cylinder in your antique firearm, and you have to put the black powder in and the ball or the conical round, and you got to go through all this process of reloading to include the probability that the firearm won't even go off because of you having the percussion caps and all that other crap that they put in there in the old days. You'll be at a tremendous disadvantage. Heck, a person is already at a disadvantage for having a antique firearm outfitted with a conversion cylinder. But it'd be better to have that, y'all, in a self-defense situation, because it is easier to load, quicker to load also. In addition to that, you know that the manufacturers who make the cowboy action loads make those particular rounds to the same specifications. So it's likely that every round is going to go off with the same pressure, giving off the same or similar velocity as indicated by the manufacturer on the box that the rounds come in. It's better that way. That's what I believe. But it's also good to have the black powder cylinder just in case those idiots in civil service want to restrict our access to fixed ammunition, right? Now we have a backup. Whereas a lot of these individuals out here who does not have antique firearms or replicas thereof are going to be at the disadvantage then, because they're not going to be able to fire black powdered rounds from these modern day weapons that many of us own. And that is a fact. But there's so much about the law, y'all. And I know I've been telling you all that I'm gonna get into it, and I am just running a little behind. But I finally have a spot to where I can shoot and actually post um, legitimized YouTube videos for you all with regards to this particular issue, because I definitely want to get it out there to people in order for people to know that these gun laws make no sense. They are technically unlawful, and I have various judicial precedents to actually prove that every gun law is actually unconstitutional. I'm not talking about these new decisions that these people come out with. When I say people, these dumb, incompetent judges, whether they be in the Supreme Court for the United States of America, the United States Court of Appeals, or some United States District Court to include state court judges. I'm talking about actual judges who respected the Bill of Rights as it was written, that respected the limited privilege authority that we the people have given to members of Congress, who we have tasked with enforcing, well, no, let me take that back, whom we have tasked with ratifying or enacting statutory provisions that law enforcement personnel can enforce and the judiciary can apply when it comes to honoring and protecting our civil, constitutional, human rights from enemies, both foreign and domestic, in which they have taken an oath under the Constitution to do in our behalf. Because we don't put people in civil service to encroach upon the very freedoms that we have. That is not the basis of the American government. The basis of the government is to protect the rights of the people, not to encroach upon the rights of the people when doing so benefits their personal, political, financial, business, or spiritual interests or agendas. That is not why we put them there, but because they have been there for so long and have been abusing us for so long through restricting or encroaching upon our civil liberties and rights. They feel that nothing can happen to them, y'all. That is why they continue to do that. And they continue to get away with it because of people like Snell that I was talking about earlier, believing in their propaganda, believing in the propaganda that comes from their lying mouths as politicians. And the fact of the matter is, we have so much authority as individuals, especially when we come together collectively, y'all. We have the right of revolution, which is a freedom that many people do not want to talk about. We also have a right to jury nullification, which is something that many people do not know about. And that is why I feel that it has become my responsibility and duty to educate the vast majority of the American population to politics and law, in which we, as people in general, are just absolutely unaware of. That is the way that I feel that we are going to come to the realization of what needs to happen, what should not be happening, in order to make the requisite changes in which we, as individuals, on a collective basis, talk about so much in this country. But the right to keep and bear arms is the only freedom that we all have that was put in place to protect every other freedom. Why do you think members of the military and law enforcement personnel carry guns, y'all? Why do they carry guns? And how the heck can people like, let's say, Donald Trump, for instance, or any other president or attorney general for that matter, or legislator, it doesn't freaking matter. But if we are mature enough to put these idiots in civil service to represent our interests under the Constitution, you hear what I said? Our interests, not theirs, our interests under the Constitution, to restrict our access to arms because they claim that we are not mature enough to have the same weapons that we have permitted them to have when carrying out their duties to protect our interests under the Constitution. So my thing is this: if Donald Trump can be around guns, firearms, and I'm pretty sure they still have firearms in the White House, right? So technically, if we're going by law, he's in constructive possession of firearms, right? Because if it was any other citizen with a prior felony conviction on their official record, police, knowing that they got guns in the house, right? Or someone else's house that they occupy, they're going to go up in there and arrest that man or woman for the constructive possession of firearms by a felon, right? So why haven't they utilized those same statutory provisions under equal protection of the law, going to the freaking White House and arrest Donald Trump for being in constructive possession of firearms? That is a problem that I have, my people. Laws are designed to be equally enforced across the board. And like the judges in the Supreme Court said, everybody is under the law. No man or woman is above the law. Doesn't matter what position in American society that one has. No one is above the law. Everyone is bound to obey the law. So I would suggest that every Secret Service agent, every FBI agent in the White House, get rid of all the guns, take them to another freaking location. Anything dealing with a weapon. That way Donald Trump can be in compliance with the law. But I got a sinking feeling that they are not going to do that. So if they're not going to do that, they are in no position to tell any one of us civilians who has been convicted of a prior felony or misdemeanor conviction that we too cannot have or be around firearms as Donald Trump has been around them. We don't have money to hire armed guards 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year like Donald Trump has, y'all, or any other civil servant for that matter. We don't have it like that because we allow so much money to be deducted from our hard-earned paychecks to fund their salaries, to fund governmental operations that we were led to believe were for our benefit under the preamble to the Constitution. You know, the Constitution still exists. It's just that many people are not adhering to the contents, to the doctrines of that specific document and every other document associated with it. That is the problem. So many people feel that the Constitution doesn't matter anymore. The Constitution doesn't mean anything. No, my brothers and sisters, for those of you who believe in that bogus concept, the Constitution does mean something. It's just that there is no one technically upholding the Constitution as it was designed to be upheld. That's the problem, y'all. And it's up to us. So for every one of you who comes across this video, let's try something different. Let's try something different. Set your feelings aside, set your thoughts aside. Let's just go by what the Constitution specifically says, specifically the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights. Let's just go by that. If any one of you are called to serve as a member of a grand jury or a petit jury during a criminal trial proceeding, and the defendant is on trial for the possession of a firearm by a felon in a state court setting, or possession of a firearm in commerce after felony conviction in a federal court setting, I want you all to find that individual not guilty or refuse to indict that man or woman. Because it can never be a crime for an individual to exercise his or her Second Amendment liberty to keep and bear arms under the supreme law of the land, a.k.a. Bill of Rights. The Second Amendment permits us all to either openly carry firearms or to conceal carry firearms. That is what the words keep and bear respectively means. So, if the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights, which is considered the supreme law of the land, permits every one of us to carry and conceal firearms, that means that any one of us who does that is in compliance with the law, which makes us law-abiding citizens. You understand? Do y'all agree? Any individual who would impede upon one's Second Amendment liberty to keep and bear arms, which is protected by the supreme law of the land, makes them criminals, i.e. felons, because they become the lawbreakers. Do you all understand that? So if an individual is just accused of essentially exercising the Second Amendment liberty to keep and bear arms under the Second Amendment to the Bill of Rights, you all, let's try a different trend. Refuse to indict and let it be known to the prosecuting attorney that that indictment stands. Meaning, you're not going to give them permission as members of the grand jury to go manipulate some other members of the community to issue a true bill of indictment when you all have already spoken. And let the defendant know so there'll be more apprised of what's going on. That way, if they do seek another indictment, technically, that's basically subjecting one to the deprivation of life, liberty, and limb a second time for the same offense, right? Which we all know constitutes double jeopardy, in spite of what those cowards and civil servants say. We have a mind of our own. We're not dumb, my people. We're smart. Heck, a lot of us are even more smarter than those in civil service. But they don't want us to know that. And for those of you who are called as pettit jurors or trial jurors, don't convict somebody for essentially exercising their Second Amendment liberty. That is a way that we can slap those politicians in their faces by not even taking up arms, but just through our words, our decision. And for those of you who think that you have to go by what the judge says, you do not under our right to jury nullification. You do not have to listen to anything that a judge says with regards to exercising that freedom. But they're not going to let you all know about that freedom. They say that we as people do not have the right to be told about our liberty to exercise the right of jury nullification. That is why I say we have to be knowledgeable of these things prior to us going into these courthouses. Because if we're not knowledgeable, we will not know or be in a position to combat any act of misinformation that those in civil service put out there for us to take in.